They thought they could toss me aside for a friend on the golf course. But one email turned their celebration into a nightmare. Watch how the man who lost everything flipped the game in seconds. "Close the door," Matt said without looking up. His voice had a softness to it, like he was trying to make something sharp feel dull. I knew what was coming. You don't spend 5 years watching the tone of a man's voice, the twitch in his jaw, the stiffness in his shoulders without learning when something is about to break. I closed the door quietly behind me, the latch clicking louder than usual in the silence. The blinds were half drawn, slivers of morning light cutting lines across the carpet and the edge of his desk. His office always smelled like pine-scented air freshener and old coffee. But today, something else hung in the air, something sour. He finally looked at me and gestured to the chair across from his. "Sit, please." I sat, not because he asked, but because I wanted to see the performance up close. Matt leaned back, eyes flicking toward the monitor like it might save him. He folded his hands, pressed his lips into a line, and sighed. It wasn't real emotion. It was rehearsed, the kind of sigh that came with a checklist. "There's no easy way to say this," he started. "You're restructuring," I said, my voice even. He blinked, thrown off for just a second. Yes, exactly." Then, like he was relieved I'd done the hard part for him, he continued. "The department's shifting. Budget cuts, consolidation. You know how things go." "Who's taking my place?" I asked, staring straight at him. That made him flinch. His eyes flicked to the side for half a second, then back. "Dan," he muttered. "Dan will be stepping in to oversee your accounts for now." I didn't speak. Just let the name settle into the space between us. Dan. The guy who called Excel that table thing. The guy who once printed out a spreadsheet because the columns stressed him out. The guy who couldn't even spell logistics, but somehow still got invited to the executive retreat. Dan, the man who golfed with Matt every Saturday and called him Matty, like they were in a college frat. "I know this is sudden," Matt continued, shifting in his seat like it had gotten smaller, "but we really value everything you've done. You've been key to so many successful campaigns. This isn't about your work. It's just timing, strategy, realignment." He talked like he was reading off a memo. The words came fast and smooth, as if he'd said them 5 times already today. Probably had. I noticed the paperwork stacked neatly beside his keyboard. My name was on one of the folders. I looked at the painting behind him, a blue ocean with soft brushstrokes and no clear shore. He once told me he bought it during a weekend trip to Santa Barbara. Said it helped him feel calm when fires needed putting out. Funny thing was, I'd been the one putting out those fires for years. I'd just been quiet about it. He kept talking. "This doesn't mean the door is closed. Things might open up again in a few months. You know how fluid things can be in this industry." He smiled like he was doing me a favor. I stood. That made him pause. HR will walk you through the exit protocol. There's a severance. I pushed for the extended package, just so you know." I nodded once, turned toward the door. "I just want you to know," he added, his voice rising like he needed to hear it himself. "This wasn't personal." I turned the handle. "It never is," I said quietly, and walked out. Outside, the hallway was still and cold. Glass walls reflected back a version of me that looked a little older than I remembered, gray at the temples, eyes sharp but tired. I passed the marketing team, the junior analysts, the place I'd quietly helped build into something clean and structured. It didn't matter. Not anymore. In the end, I wasn't loud enough to compete with a driver, a sand wedge, and 18 holes. I reached my office. 2 small boxes. That's all it took to erase 5 years. I packed carefully. Folders, notebooks, flash drives. I paused at the bottom drawer, pulled out the old team photo from our first product launch. Matt had his arm around my shoulder in it. He'd written, "Couldn't have done it without you, brother," on the back. I stared at it for a long moment, then dropped it face down into the box. The door creaked open behind me. I didn't need to look. I could smell the cologne, cheap and loud. "Hey, man," Dan said, leaning on the doorframe like he owned the place. "Tough break, huh?" He smiled awkwardly, like he wasn't sure how to fake sympathy. I didn't say a word. I just picked up the first box, shifted it under my arm, and moved past him. He stepped back, scratching the back of his neck. "I mean, they didn't really give me a choice either," he said, his voice cracking just a little. "You know how it is. Matt said it was just reorg stuff." I paused in the hallway, turned just enough to glance at him. "Take care of the database," I said. "It bites if you poke it wrong." He laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. Outside, the sun was too bright. My car felt too small. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, watching the entrance. No one came out. No one followed. The company I helped stabilize through 3 client crashes, 2 leadership overhauls, and 1 near acquisition. And I didn't even get a handshake from anyone else. Just Matt's cold voice and Dan's sorry smirk. I drove home with the windows down, let the wind strip away the bitterness clinging to my coat. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't break anything. Because this wasn't the end of something. It was the shift. The moment the board turned, and I saw the game for what it really was. He thought I was done. They always think that when the quiet one leaves the room. But I knew something Matt didn't. Everything they relied on, systems, clients, infrastructure, it ran through my hands, and I built it clean, tight, and trackable. Dan could wear the suit and sit in the chair, but he was stepping into something he didn't understand. And Matt? Matt was stepping onto a plank he didn't know I'd been watching rot for months. Some people light fires when they're angry. Me? I just wait for the wind to shift. Because while they saw my silence as surrender, I knew better. Some people burn things down. Others wait for the right gust of wind. He wasn't always like this. I still remember the first few months under Matt. He was sharp, sure of himself, a little too fast with criticism, but fair in a way that mattered. He didn't micromanage. He'd drop a thick file on my desk and say, "You've got better instincts for this than I do. Run with it." And I did. I brought in new clients, built cleaner systems, made everything run smoother. He used to call me his right hand, and for a while, I believed he meant it. There were nights we stayed past 10, both of us hunched over laptops in the glass conference room, the rest of the building dark. He'd loosen his tie, lean back in his chair and say, "You've got a mind that makes things clearer, man. I'd be buried without you." Those words stuck with me for a long time. I carried them like a badge. Because back then, it felt like we were building something real together, something sharp and honest. But people change. Or maybe they just reveal themselves. It started small, subtle. He'd cut me off during meetings, only to reword my suggestions as if they were his. He'd chuckle at my emails and say, "Too many numbers. Keep it short next time." Then he'd lead a pitch using the exact numbers I gave him. He'd forward my drafts to the board with his name in the header and mine buried in the CC line. At first I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't in it for applause. I was in it to build, to create systems that didn't fall apart when no one was watching. Then came Dan. The first time I saw him, he was leaning against the doorframe of our strategy room, holding a coffee like it was a prop. Matt introduced him casually. "Buddy from college, just sitting in for a few days." Dan wore a blazer like he'd borrowed it and talked like everything was a joke. I remember him saying, "What's all this spreadsheet wizardry? Feels like Hogwarts in here." The interns laughed. Matt laughed. I didn't. Dan showed up again the next week, then again. A month later, he had a badge, a laptop, and a seat across the hall from mine. They said he was consulting on engagement strategy. When I asked what exactly that meant, Matt clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "Loosen up, man. Dan's just here to help connect some dots. You two should grab a drink sometime. Might surprise you." I didn't need a drink. I needed answers. Dan's first project was a disaster. He pitched a campaign to one of our biggest clients, Hensley Group, that completely misunderstood their brand tone. He mixed up KPIs, promised deliverables we didn't have the bandwidth for, and sent the draft with typos in the subject line. The client pulled out within the week. I spent the next 3 nights rebuilding trust, sending spreadsheets, apologizing, showing clean numbers. Matt called me the next morning. "Thanks for having the teams back," he said, voice smooth, like I'd done something heroic. But there was no mention of Dan, no talk of the damage, just a pat on the head, like I'd swept up a mess quietly. Gratitude? Number, it was a message. Keep quiet, fix things, be useful. So I smiled. I said, "Of course." And I started watching. I kept a folder, encrypted, private, hidden under a generic folder called Q1 Old Leads. Every time Dan made a move that didn't make sense, I documented it. When he approved a vendor without a PO, I saved it. When he changed a timeline without telling the client, I logged it. When he forwarded an internal report to his personal Gmail, I captured the metadata. I didn't confront. I didn't warn. I collected. Matt, meanwhile, leaned in harder. He started dressing sharper, laughing louder. He and Dan took hour-long lunches, came back with bourbon breath, slapped backs in the hallway like frat brothers on homecoming weekend. The office dynamic shifted. Our department went from being sharp and silent to noisy and erratic. Deadlines slipped. Sloppy pitches rolled out. But no one noticed, not at first, because Matt covered for Dan, and I quietly kept everything else standing. One day, Matt walked into my office holding a tablet. "Mind helping Dan polish this pitch?" he asked, dropping it on my desk without waiting for a yes. I opened the file. It was mine. The layout, the phrasing, the market forecast I'd spent weeks fine-tuning. Only the title was changed. Prepared by Dan Keene. I looked up. "You want me to fix a pitch that's already mine?" Matt laughed, scratching his beard. "Look, man, you're the brains. Dan's the showman. It's a good combo." It wasn't. It was theft, and he knew it. That night, I printed out my original draft. I lined it up next to Dan's version and took photos, side by side, word for word. I added them to the folder, titled the file, Proof of Repackaging. Then the bonuses came. Quietly. Dan got one. I didn't. I found out through accounting. Someone forwarded the wrong spreadsheet. Matt's name was listed under approval, dated 2 days before my termination. That was when it hit me. He'd been planning it for months. The friendly check-ins, the extra praise, even that final team dinner where he made a toast to loyalty. It was all the slow sound of a blade being sharpened. Dan wasn't an accident. He was the replacement. Chosen not because he could lead, but because he wouldn't challenge. Because he laughed at Matt's jokes and nodded at every half-baked idea. I was never the problem. I was just in the way. That weekend, I sat in my apartment surrounded by sticky notes and printouts, every bit of data I'd pulled from the last year. I pored over timestamps, message logs, duplicated files. I knew our department inside and out, because I'd built it. Dan might have had the title now, but he was walking through a house I designed, with walls he didn't know were load-bearing. I remembered something Matt once said to me. We were prepping for a presentation at 2 a.m., and he was tired, leaning back in his chair. "People like you make the gears turn," he said. "People like me just take credit and try not to mess it up." Back then, it felt like honesty. Now, it felt like a confession. They thought I didn't notice, thought I'd keep cleaning up their messes. But I was watching. Every line of code, every calendar change, every accidental oversight. And I had all of it. Quiet, time-stamped, traceable. Matt thought he'd backed me into a corner. But what he never realized, what Dan was too shallow to sense, was that the corner they pushed me into had a clear view of everything. Every blind spot, every shortcut, every lie. And all I had to do was wait. Because I wasn't playing dumb. I was watching, taking notes, saving emails, pulling copies of approvals. I'd built the infrastructure that ran the department, and quietly kept a duplicate of every major process change I'd authored, every spreadsheet formula, every project timeline. I had a digital fingerprint on everything they didn't understand but relied on daily. And Matt? He had no idea. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. No phone ringing. No morning rush. No conference calls cutting through my focus. Just silence, and the low hum of my laptop fan as it started up for the third time that morning. I sat at the kitchen table, same one I'd eaten dinner at every night for the past 2 weeks, half-finished coffee cold beside me. This wasn't sulking. I wasn't licking wounds or plotting revenge with fire in my chest. This was something slower, colder, a clean kind of focus. The folder I opened was titled Legacy Drafts, but the files inside had nothing to do with nostalgia. They were blueprints, records, traces of everything I had built, refined, documented, process flowcharts, client correspondence logs, timelines with digital signatures and saved versions, everything that made our department run, every key I'd ever handed to Matt thinking he'd respect the lock. I dug deeper. Buried in an old Outlook archive, I found the first red flag, an email from Matt to Dan, dated 4 months before I was let go. Subject line, "Polish and send this in your name." Attached was my report, forecast projections I had built over 3 weeks, complete with my formatting, my formulas, my watermark removed. Dan had replied 2 hours later with a thumbs-up emoji and the line, "Looks good, bro." That one exchange sat like lead in my stomach. The numbers in that report had secured our deal with Delridge Capital. I'd been the one to make the projections fit their quarterly expectations. I clicked into the next email, then the next. Expense reports. Dan had marked multiple outings at a private golf club as client retention events, even though 2 of the attendees listed weren't clients. They were mutual friends of his and Matt's. One invoice included 2 bottles of a rare bourbon, over $700 each, flagged as a hospitality gift. But the shipping address? It was Matt's home. I kept going, for hours. The days blurred, the sun rising and falling in the window behind me. I read every forwarded thread, every attached spreadsheet with a new author name slapped over my templates. There was one thread that stopped me cold. A message Matt had sent directly to the executive team just a month before I was fired. "Dan's model helped us realign our Q3 goals with laser focus," it read. Couldn't have done it without his projections. But those projections? I knew the formula buried inside that Excel sheet. It was mine. I recognized the conditional formatting rule I'd created, the one that highlighted anything over 10% variance in red. No one else used that kind of logic in our department. It was a quiet signature, invisible to anyone not looking closely. But I saw it, because I built it. That was it. I closed the laptop, sat back, let the weight of it all settle over me. They hadn't just taken credit. They'd rewritten history, made it look like I'd never been part of it. Matt wasn't sloppy, he was calculated. He'd been using Dan like a mouthpiece while I did the work in the background. And when enough pieces were in place, he cut me out. Quietly. Efficiently. I didn't need to scream. I needed a match. I reopened the laptop and began drafting the email. Subject: Concerns. Regarding departmental oversight and data integrity. The recipient: Victor Sloan, Vice President of Operations. I had spoken to him only once in 5 years, in an elevator ride after a strategy meeting. He was quiet, sharp, and didn't suffer fools. I kept the tone simple: no anger, no personal stories, just facts. I listed 5 major data inconsistencies in quarterly reports submitted under Dan's name. I attached backup files, time-stamped edits, metadata showing original authorship, screenshots of Slack conversations where I outlined projections days before they were created by Dan. I cross-referenced expense reports with public posts, Dan's own photos at the golf course on weekends that were charged as weekday client sessions. Then I wrote the line that mattered most. I believe this misrepresentation puts our client relationships and compliance requirements at risk. I didn't threaten. I didn't hint at lawsuits. I knew better than to sound bitter. I wanted to sound like what I was, someone who cared about the work, someone who noticed the details, someone who had nothing left to lose, but everything still to protect. I attached the final set of files, 15 documents in total. Then I stared at the send button. I waited for 1 full minute, letting the stillness wrap around me. Then I clicked. The next 2 days passed slow. My inbox stayed quiet. I kept my phone on loud, jumped every time it buzzed. I told myself not to hope, but hope crept in anyway. Then, late Friday afternoon, the email came. Would you be available for a quick call next week? It was from Victor. I responded within minutes. Yes, anytime that works for you. The call was on Tuesday. His voice was dry, clipped. He didn't waste words. I've reviewed what you sent, he said. Some of this is deeply concerning. He asked for clarification on file logs, on timeline discrepancies. I explained everything. Calm, measured, like I was presenting a project, not burning down a building. He didn't tell me what he would do next. He didn't need to. By Thursday, Dan was gone. Administrative leave pending performance review. That was the official line. A week later, Matt stopped coming into the office. No announcement, no goodbye email, just silence. HR sent out a vague memo thanking him for his years of service and wishing him well. But I knew. People talk. Word traveled quietly, down the halls I used to walk, through whispers in the strategy rooms, in side glances exchanged over cubicle walls. Everyone had their theories. Only a few knew the truth. I didn't share the email. I didn't leak the documents. I didn't even call the coworkers who texted me to ask if I'd heard the news. I just watched it unfold from my apartment, one tab open to the company site, the other open to a job board I hadn't touched in days. The audit report never went public. There was no article, no press release. But things changed. The company scrubbed Dan's name from team bios. The quarterly report was delayed due to internal review. Compliance officers visited the branch. And Matt? He disappeared like a shadow at sunrise. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just sat back, folded my hands, and watched the same way I had for months, quietly, carefully. Because sometimes all it takes is one well-placed spark. I didn't share it. I didn't need to. The silence that followed was enough. I never went back. Not once. Not to retrieve a box of files. Not to glance at the desk I spent years earning. The place was tainted, not by what they did, but by what they allowed. Silence, complicity, favoritism dressed up as leadership. I didn't crave apologies. Apologies are for accidents. What they did was deliberate. Instead, I sat across from a man named Ellis Grant in a conference room that smelled like fresh carpet glue and cheap cologne. He was the COO of a smaller but hungry firm, clean logo, no politics, yet. He'd heard whispers from a former client. Word travels fast in closed circles, faster when those circles have money riding on integrity. We heard what happened, Ellis said, folding his fingers across a thin binder labeled Department Recovery Strategy. And we could use someone who's been through fire. I studied him. Late 40s, no wedding ring, eyes like granite behind thin glasses. His voice wasn't eager, just precise. He wasn't selling. He was betting. "What's broken?" I asked quietly. "Trust. Direction metrics are down. Culture's brittle. Our last director left in the middle of Q3 and took 3 managers with him." I nodded slowly. "You want it rebuilt?" He met my eyes. "Not just rebuilt, rewired." I said yes. Not because I needed the job, I needed the reset, a clean slate, a space where competence could breathe without being crushed by cronyism. From day one, I rewrote the playbook. No whisper meetings, no buddy hiring. I sat with junior analysts, watched how they worked, asked questions they'd never been asked. Some flinched, afraid it was a trap. Others leaned in, hungry to prove what no one had bothered to see. I picked the quiet ones, the spreadsheet whisperers, the quiet listeners in corner cubicles, the thinkers who never got invited to golf. The first few weeks were silent storms, new processes, role audits, performance matrices built on logic, not personality. I knew it would ruffle some feathers. I was counting on it. One afternoon, as I reviewed a backlog of vendor reports, Ellis stepped into my office. He stood there a moment, watching the whiteboard behind me, half covered in formulas, half in post-it notes. "You always build like this?" he asked. "From the bones up," I replied. He gave a rare smile. "Remind me never to work against you." I didn't smile back. "You won't have to, unless you put a friend in my seat." He laughed once, but didn't miss the point. "Understood." We built quietly. Quarterly numbers ticked up. Clients stayed. Staff turnover dropped. But that wasn't what mattered to me. What mattered was that I could look anyone in the eye, knowing I hadn't stepped on a single neck to stand up straighter. Months passed. Autumn turned the skyline rust orange. One Monday, I ducked into a cafe near the business district, just for a quick espresso before a vendor call. It was one of those minimalist shops with gray tile walls and a barista who looked like he moonlighted as a DJ. I was standing near the pickup counter when I heard a familiar voice say too loudly, "Oh, wow, you." I turned. Matt stood 10 feet away, cardboard cup in hand, same black trench coat from the old office days. But he looked smaller. His face was thinner, cheeks sunken like someone who hadn't been sleeping right. His eyes darted, hesitant, trying to read me. "Didn't expect to see you here," he added, trying a smile. I didn't return it. I just looked at him. He stepped closer. "You've been good?" "Better," I said plainly. He opened his mouth like he was gearing up for some kind of explanation, maybe even an apology wrapped in a business excuse. I didn't wait. I turned back to the counter. My espresso had arrived. There was nothing left to say. Let him carry it. The guilt, the fallout, the weight of knowing he gambled everything for a friend who couldn't carry water. Dan had been gone before the audit even wrapped. Matt had held out longer, but not by much. I never learned the exact details of his exit. I didn't need to. The system had spoken for me. At my new office, I made sure the system never had to speak that way again. I built guardrails, real ones. I structured checks so no one person could override performance reviews. I rewrote the hiring framework so team leads couldn't bring in trusted friends without blind panel approvals. I even removed golf memberships from the client engagement budget, buried the clause deep enough in the policy manual that no one could slide it back in. One Friday, Ellis walked in during a department huddle. I was showing the team a dashboard I'd built that tracked internal efficiencies, not flashy, but brutally honest. "Transparency," I told them. "It isn't just about sharing results. It's about making sure the system is too smart to be fooled." One of the newer analysts, a sharp-eyed kid named Marcus, raised his hand. "So no one can game it anymore?" I looked at him. "They can try, but the system will show it, quietly, precisely." Ellis nodded behind me. That's the kind of leadership we needed. The next day, I cleaned out some of the older files in my home drive, ones from the past job. The folder was labeled simply, "For the record." I hesitated for a moment. Then I archived it. Not deleted, just sealed. The fight was over. The truth had already done its work. A week later, I got an email from a recruiter. Apparently, my name had begun circulating in certain circles. Quiet leadership, strategic clarity, operational ethics. The words felt like armor, not compliments. I replied with 2 lines. "Thanks for reaching out. I'm exactly where I need to be." Some men think power is in the corner office, in the title, in the circle of friends you keep close to protect you. But real power is knowing the system, well enough to let it speak for you. I didn't destroy him. I didn't need to. I showed the truth, quietly, precisely. And I walked away with my name clean, my head high, and every record intact. I never wanted revenge. I wanted correction. And with one email I got it. Disclaimer. The story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of workplace injustice, cronyism, and the unexpected power of strategic action. This narrative aims to highlight the importance of standing up for yourself, the value of resilience, and how quickly fortunes can turn in a professional setting.